Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to see about AZ-500, a series of questions that we are going through. So make sure you go through these questions and answers before you go ahead and take your Microsoft certification. So let's head on to the list of questions now. So what are the three authentication mechanisms that an application can use when using Azure Key Vault for storing secrets, certificates, and related keys? So the options are A. Container Instance Registry, option B. Azure App Registry, option C. Service Principal with Certificate, option D. Managed Identities for Azure Resources, option E. Service Principal with Secret, option F. Service Principal with Encrypted Credentials. So we have like list of options and the correct answer is Service Principal with Certificate. So you're configuring security for data in transit for an Azure App Service. Which of the following security tasks should be performed? Choose all that apply. Do not choose any that does not apply. So let's see the list of options that are available. Option A, HTTPS enforced. Option B, upload SSL certificate. Option C, test HTTPS. Option D, minimum TLS version enforced. Option E, bind SSL certificate. And the right options are all the options. So you will have everything that's applied and all are valid options. So the next one, a company currently has an Azure subscription in place. They have a storage account named Skill Lab Store. They decide to provide access to the storage account with the use of shared access signatures and stored access policies. They create several shared access signatures and provide access to the users to use the file and blob service via these signatures. They then see that unauthorized users also are able to use both the file and the blob service. They need to revoke all access to the storage account. They decide to regenerate the key that was used to generate the shared access signature. Would this resolve the underlying issue? So let's see the list of options that are available. So we have either the option would resolve, is it yes, or is it no? And the option is no. So moving on to the next one, your company is planning on implementing conditional access policies. You have to implement the policies based on the existing risk events available for Azure AD. You have to identify the risk level for the following events defined for Azure AD. Users with leaked credentials, sign-ins from anonymous IP addresses, impossible travels to a typical location, sign-in from unfamiliar locations. Which of the following is the risk level associated with the following risk event? And also, the sign-ins from anonymous IP addresses. So the options are a low will be considered as a low risk, a medium risk, or a high risk, and also a critical risk. So we have like 4 different options, and the right answer would be medium level risk. So moving on to the next one, your company is planning on implementing conditional access policies. You have to implement the policies based on the existing risk events available for Azure AD. You have to identify the risk level for the following events defined for Azure AD. Users with leaked credentials, sign-ins from anonymous IP addresses, impossible travels to typical location, sign-in from unfamiliar locations. Which of the following is the risk level associated with the following risk event? Sign in from unfamiliar locations. So if you see here, it's just about a sort of a case study. So Microsoft keeps, generally changing question patterns. So they would ask a list of questions along with the case studies just to, shuffle us in around. So you can see all the list of options, and the right answer is medium level risk. So moving on to the next one. A company currently has an on-premise forest defined via Active Directory. The forest contains a domain name skilllabs.com. They have set up an Azure subscription. They want to deploy Azure AD Connect to integrate with their on-premises Active Directory domain with Azure AD. So they have the following key requirements. Ensure that password policies are applied to user accounts that are synced to Azure AD. Ensure that login restrictions are applied to user accounts that are synced to Azure AD. Minimize the number of servers required for the entire implementation. And finally, which of the following would you consider for the implementation? So you have a lot of different options, and and we have to see, which of the following would be able to prefer as a part of the implementation. So the options are A, federated identity using Active Directory Federation Services, which is ADFS. Password hash synchronization using Active Directory Federation Service, ADFS. Password hash synchronization with the seamless single sign-on, SSO, or the password authentication with the seamless single sign-on. And the right answer is option D, password authentication with seamless single sign-on. So the next question would be: a company current has an Azure AD tenant named skilllab.com. The tenant consists of the following users: name, role, sign-in frequency. SkillLab user A with a password administrator every working day. SkillLab user B, password administrator bi-weekly. SkillLab user C, global administrator, password administrator once a month. So the following access review has been configured. So the things here are: for whom would the SkillLab user A be able to perform a review for? So maybe if you can find a screenshot, you would also get some idea about that. And the list of options would be SkillLab user A only, SkillLab user A and a SkillLab user B, SkillLab user A and a SkillLab user C. Option D, SkillLab user A, B, and a SkillLab user C. And the right answer would be option A, SkillLab user A only. So moving on to the next one. Our team is planning on deploying a virtual machine named SkillLab VM to an Azure subscription. The virtual machine will be created in a virtual network named SkillLab Network. The virtual network contains a subnet named default. A service endpoint has been created for the subnet. The Azure virtual machine will be based on the latest Ubuntu server image. The virtual machine will be used to host the Docker containers. So you have to ensure that the containers are all able to access the Azure storage resources and the SQL databases using the service endpoint, and which of the following can be done to fulfill this requirement. So let's see what sort of an options that we have. So option A, ensure the service endpoint as an entry point to the Docker containers. Option B, change the network layer type for the underlying Docker containers. Option C, install the container network interface plugin. Option D, create a custom Docker compose.yml format file. So the right answer, install the container network interface plugin, which is option C. So the next one, a company currently uses Azure Resource Manager, which is the ARM template, to deploy Azure virtual machines. You want to ensure that all unused Windows features are automatically disabled on the provisioned virtual machines. Which of the following would you use to fulfill this requirement? So we have a couple of options, and you can see Azure Automation State Configuration is the right one, and the other options are Azure Advisor, Application Security Groups, and Azure Firewall. Right, so we will move on to the next question. So you have to deploy a policy that ensures Microsoft Infrastructure as a Service anti-malware extension, which is installed on all Windows servers. You can also see a snippet on the list of policy that it has. And the question would be like, which of the following goes into slot 1? So we have different slots here, like slot 1, 2, and a 3. And we will see the options are A, allow, option B, deny, option C, deploy, option D, deploy if not exist. And the right answer would be option D, deploy if not exist. Okay, so moving on to the next one. You have to deploy a policy that ensures Microsoft iOS anti-malware extension installed on all Windows servers based on the snippets that we have. And we also identified, what's there on slot 1. So this one is related to which of the following goes into slot 2. Options are A, IAS anti-malware, B, anti-malware, C, Microsoft.azure.security, D, Microsoft.azure.IaaS anti-malware. And the right option is IaaS anti-malware, option A. So moving on to the next. So the next one, you have to configure an Azure Kubernetes cluster to connect to an Azure Container Registry. You need to ensure the auto-generated service prince policy is to authenticate to the Azure Container Registry. Which of the following would you do to fulfill this requirement? So let's see what sort of options that we have, like A, store the service principal in an Azure Key Vault, B, create an Azure Active Directory user, C, create an Azure Active Directory group, D, carry out an Azure Active Directory role assignment. And the right answer is carry out an Azure Active Directory role assignment. So the next one, a company has an Azure subscription that has the following virtual machines with the name, resource group, and status. And you can see the name has Skill Lab VM1 with the resource group of Skill Lab Group 1 and status shows as running. Similarly, Skill Lab VM2 with the Skill Lab Group 2 status shows running. The following policies are then added to the subscription policy definition resource type and the scope, obviously not allowed the resource types, virtual machines with the allowed resource type virtual machine showing Skill Lab Group 2. You can also create the following resource locks, and you can see the name type created on with the VM lock read only. And would you be able to stop the Skill Lab VM1? Option A, yes. Option B, no. And the right answer is option B, no. So the next one, as usual, this is also one of the case studies where we have like similar sort of questions, but you can see only the options are differing. So Microsoft has the tendency of twisting questions, so we have to be very careful when we answer these questions. We have to go through the entire question once again and then make sure what sort of a difference that it has. So in this question, you can see, that everything looks the same as the previous one, but the only question that they prompt is, would you be able to stop the Skill Lab VM2? Because the previous one, it was actually denoting to VM1, so this one is actually referring to Skill Lab VM2. You can see there are two options, which is option A, yes, option B, no. Right answer is option B, no. So the next one, this is just the following case study that we are going through. It's the same where a company has an Azure subscription with the following virtual machine. We have name, resource group, and the status. You can see everything literally the same with the options like name, type, created on, etc. And the final question, it shows, can you create a virtual machine in Skill Lab Group 1, which means they are actually referring to a particular resource group. So the previous questions were actually pointed towards the virtual machines, asking questions related to virtual machine 1, virtual machine 2. So this one's related to resource group, and we have two options, option A, yes, option B, no. And we can't create a virtual machine, so the option B is no. Right, so this one, a same sort of a case study, and you can see this is actually now pointing to resource group second, which is like the second resource group. So if you see the case study, you can see you have a separate virtual machines allocated to a particular resource group, and also the status shows as running. And so here they are saying, or maybe they are asking, like, can you create a virtual machine in Skill Lab Group 2? Because the previous question was actually pointing to a resource group 1. That's the reason it shows like Skill Lab Group 1. This one is actually pointing to a different resource group, and we have two different options. Option A, yes, option B, no, and the right answer is option A, yes, because if you see on the allow resource type, it has a virtual machine with the resource group 2. So the next question, your company currently has a subscription in Azure AD tenant named skilllabs.com. You're currently has a global administrator for the tenant. You have been asked to create a custom sensitivity label in the Azure Security Center. What would you need to do first to accomplish this requirement? Right, so we will see like what sort of a sensitivity label that we needed, or what sort of thing that you have to accomplish in order to create a custom sensitivity label. Options are A, upgrade the pricing tier of Azure Security Center. Option B, assign a policy to the Azure Security Center. Option C, create a custom sensitive information type. Option D, ensure to create an integration with the Microsoft Cloud App Security. So the right answer is option C. Yes, we can create a custom sensitive information type. Right, so the next question is, in Azure Security Center, a playbook has been configured. The playbook needs to be modified to send email messages to a description group named Skill Lab Group. Which of the following would you need to modify in the playbook for this requirement? So this is actually specific to Azure Security Center sort of a question. And you can see the list of options that are available. Option A, application, Azure Application Insights. Option B, Azure Monitor. Option C, Azure Function. Option D, Azure Logic Apps Designer. And the right answer is Azure Logic Apps Designer. So if you go through all the questions, right? So basically these have different curriculums and everything is a mix of all these questions. So if you see the next one, a company has an Azure tenant in place named skilllab.com. The company wants to deploy a service named skilllab SRV that would run on a virtual machine running Windows Server 2016. This service needs to authenticate to the tenant and access a Microsoft Graph in order to read the directory data. You need to delegate the minimum required permissions to the service. And which of the following steps would you perform in Azure? So maybe they are saying like, choose three options or answers from the options below. So the list of options are add a delegated permission, add an app registration, add an application permission, configure an Azure AD application proxy, and grant permission. So let's see what are all the three answers that matches it. So option B matches it, which says add an application registration. Option C matches add an application permission for it. Option E, grant permission on it. So yeah, so we have come to end of this session. But these are our real-time practice questions. So always go through the list of curriculum, what they have said for the certification, and then go ahead and revise these questions. And this should help you in getting passed onto the Azure Security Engineer.